In this module, we are going to learn transmission mechanism and factors determining effectiveness of monetary policy in ISLM model. The ISLM model is used to determine the level of output in an economy. The level of output is one of the most important indicators of the economic well-being of a country. This model brings together the goods and money markets to establish simultaneously equilibrium in both. The goods market is at equilibrium when investments equal savings, hence IS, and the money market is at equilibrium when the demand for money, liquidity, equals the money supply, hence LM. At the intersection of IS and LM curves, equilibrium interest rate and income level are determined. The monetary policy is used to raise the level of income in the economy and to stabilize the price level. As prices are assumed to be constant in the ISLM model, monetary policy seeks to work on the output and income. The monetary policy changes the level of money supply in the economy, shifts the LM curve and causes disequilibrium, which is then corrected by movement in the interest rate and income level. The process by which monetary shocks leads to the expansion of aggregate demand is called the monetary transmission mechanism. There are two broad steps involved in this process. The first occurs when changes in money supply result in portfolio disequilibrium, and in the other step, changes in interest rate due to portfolio adjustment affect aggregate demand and output. There are many factors on which the effectiveness of monetary policy in achieving the desired goal depends, like slope of IS curve, bank lending behavior, slope of LM curve, liquidity trap situation, classical assumptions, etc. Also, there are situations which can make monetary transmission mechanism weaker. Let us analyze in detail the transmission mechanism of monetary policy in the ISLM model. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the LM curve and monetary policy, learn the dynamics of monetary expansion in the ISLM framework, identify the transmission mechanism of monetary policy, evaluate factors affecting the effectiveness of monetary policy in ISLM model, analyze the monetary policy with varying slopes of LM. Let us begin with the LM curve and monetary policy in ISLM model. The LM curve shows different combinations of the interest rate and output where the money market is in equilibrium. It is the condition in the money market where the demand for money liquidity preference is equal to the money supply N. According to the liquidity preferences theory of Keynes, the supply and demand for real money balances determines the interest rate which prevails in the economy. It assumes that the money supply is determined by the central bank and is therefore fixed. The model identifies that people can hold money for transaction, precaution and speculative purposes. The demand for transactions and precautionary balances is assumed to have a positive relationship with income. The demand for speculative balances depends on the current level of the rate of interest and has an inverse relationship with the rate of interest. The positive relationship between the demand for money and income means that the LM curve is upward sloping. The slope of the LM curve is determined by the income sensitivity and the interest sensitivity of the demand for money. The LM curve will be steeper the higher the income responsiveness and the smaller the interest responsiveness of the demand for money. As the LM curve deals with the money market, it is used as a monetary policy tool. The monetary policy which changes money supply will shift the LM curve. An increase in the money supply lowers the interest rate, resulting in a downward shift of the LM curve. However, adjustment does not end here because in the ISLM framework, both goods and money market have to be in equilibrium. So there is further adjustment in goods market which influence the interest rate and income level. It is widely believed that monetary policy is a key economic management tool. However, critics point that there is a weak link between the money supply and aggregate demand, and the money supply is difficult to control. Let us discuss the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. The money market adjusts relatively rapidly than the goods market. This is because the money market can adjust merely through the buying and selling of bonds, other assets. The interest rate adjusts rapidly and money market effectively is always in equilibrium. This assumption implies that when we are on the LM curve, any departure from the equilibrium in the money market is almost instantaneously eliminated by an appropriate change in the interest rate. The goods market, on the other hand, adjusts relatively slowly because firms have to change their production schedules, which takes time. By altering the money supply using monetary policy, policymakers manipulate the base money reserves, which is then transmitted into a broader money supply via the money multiplier mechanisms. The monetary transmission mechanism describes how policy-induced changes in the nominal money stock or the short-term nominal interest rate impact real variables such as aggregate output and employment. The transmission mechanism of monetary policy to the real economy is through different channels with varying time duration. The significance of each channel varies through time. There have been a variety of empirical evidences on the significance of different channels. The interest rate channel is the standard Keynesian channel of monetary transmission. Specific channels of monetary transmission operate through the effects that monetary policy has on interest rates, exchange rates, equity and real estate prices, bank lending and firm balance sheets. Now let us look at the key assumptions of MTM. Central bank liabilities include both components of the monetary base, currency and bank reserves. Hence, the central bank controls the monetary base. Indeed, monetary policy actions typically begin when the central bank changes the monetary base through an open market operation, purchasing other securities, most frequently government bonds, to increase the monetary base or selling securities to decrease the monetary base. Now, let us look at the channels of monetary transmission. Mishkin 1995 usefully describes the various channels through which monetary policy actions as summarized by changes in either the nominal money stock or the short-term nominal interest rate impact real variables such as aggregate output and employment. To begin with interest rate channel. According to the traditional Keynesian interest rate channel, a policy-induced increase in the short-term nominal interest rate leads first to an increase in longer-term nominal interest rates as investors act to arbitrage away differences in risk-adjusted expected returns on debt instruments of various maturities, as described by the expectations hypothesis of the term structure. When nominal prices are slow to adjust, these movements in nominal interest rates translate into movements in real interest rates as well. Firms finding that their real cost of borrowing over all horizons has increased, cut back on their investment expenditures. Likewise, households facing higher real borrowing cost scale back on their purchases of homes, automobiles and other durable goods. Aggregate output and employment fall. This interest rate channel lies at the heart of the traditional Keynesian textbook ISLM model. However, there is evidence of asymmetric adjustment to monetary policy through interest rate channel. That is, the lending rate adjusts more quickly to monetary tightening than to loosening. In addition, the speed of adjustment of deposit and lending rates to changes in the policy rate has varied through years. Slide 28. The success of monetary expansion through interest rate channel depends on many factors like how much responsive or sensitive demand is to change in liquidity, as well as the crowding out effect on private sector credit of a monetary expansion. The success of monetary expansion through interest rate channel depends on many factors like how much responsive or sensitive demand is to change in liquidity, as well as the crowding out effect on private sector credit of a monetary expansion. Next is asset price channel. Monetarists argue instead that monetary policy actions impact prices simultaneously across a wide variety of markets for financial assets and durable goods, but especially in the markets for equities and real estate, and that those asset price movements are all capable of generating important wealth effects that impact through spending, output, and employment. Two distinct credit channels, the bank lending channel and the balance sheet channel, also allow the effects of monetary policy actions to propagate through the real economy. Then we have credit channel. The credit channel operates through the varying the availability of credit in the economy. This channel operates through two channels, bank lending channel and balance sheet channel. Next is bank lending channel. Theories and models of the bank lending channel emphasize that for many banks, particularly small banks, deposits represent the principal source of funds for lending, and that for many firms, particularly small firms, bank loans represent the principal source of funds for investment. Hence, an open market operation that leads first to a contraction in the supply of bank reserves and then to a contraction in bank deposits requires banks that are specially dependent on deposits to cut back on their lending, and firms that are specially dependent on bank loans to cut back on their investment spending. Imperfections confronting individual banks and firms thereby contribute in the aggregate to the decline in output and employment that follows a monetary tightening. Next is balance sheet channel. The balance sheet reflects the position of net worth and credit worthiness of a firm. This channel operates through the net worth of firms with the effects of adverse selection and moral hazard. A decline in the firm's net worth reduces the value of collateral offered for getting loans. This in turn raises the problem of adverse selection and reduces lending for investment spending purposes. Lower net worth also results in the problem of moral hazard because business owners having lower equity stake in the firm will have a larger incentive to take part in risky projects. This leads to lesser lending and investment in the economy. Finally, we have exchange rate channel. According to Michenisam 2006, an increase in money supply M causes the domestic real interest rate R to fall. Therefore, assets which are denominated in domestic currency becomes less attractive than assets denominated in foreign currency, resulting in a depreciation of domestic currency. The depreciation of the domestic currency makes domestic goods relatively cheaper than foreign goods, thereby causing net export NX and output to rise. So, this channel operates through the net exports component of aggregate demand. So, the exchange rate channel works through the changes in capital flows and resulting depreciation of currency, thereby affecting trade balance and demand. Monetary policy decision is generally conditioned by maintaining a balance between growth and inflation. Assessing the outlook for growth, inflation and macroeconomic risk in a forward-looking context. At times, a phase of expansionary monetary policy raises growth but triggers inflation, thereby threatening the sustainability of the achieved growth. So, there could be periods of rising inflation and falling growth below its potential arising from several sources such as the lagged impact of policy stimulus from earlier phases and adverse supply shocks, both domestic and external, which may persist. The given figure shows the monetary transmission through change in repo rate. Thus, the monetary transmission mechanism explains in steps how monetary policy affects aggregate demand. The transmission mechanism is characterized by long, variable and uncertain time lags. Thus, it is difficult to predict the precise effect of monetary policy actions on the economy and price level. In the ISLM framework, we assume prices to remain constant and all adjustment will be through changes in interest rate and income. When the central bank initiates the monetary expansion by raising the money supply, the interest rate falls at the current national income level. This is because at the existing interest rate, there is an excess supply of money and the interest rate has to fall to stimulate an increased demand for money. The interest rate continues to fall until the demand for money is again equal to the increased money supply and money market equilibrium is restored. This also involves adjustment in the goods market as we are talking about the effects of monetary policy in ISLM framework. The adjustment occurs in the form of upward movement along the new LM curve, which causes a rise in interest rate and income level. In the ISLM model, the monetary policy aims to expand the income and output level in the economy. The output is targeted in the second step of monetary transmission mechanism, where the change in interest rate influence aggregate demand and output. It must be noted here that not just investment but consumption expenditure is also affected by the change in interest rate. But we do not isolate the effect of interest rate changes on consumption and investment. Rather, we will analyze the effect of interest rate changes on aggregate spending. There are many factors which determine how effective the monetary policy is going to be in affecting the equilibrium income and output in an economy. Some of the factors are listed below. Monetary policy multiplier, slope of IS curve, slope of LM curve. Lending behavior of banks, development of money markets, the prevalence of informal credit sector, the fiscal policy stance. First is monetary policy multiplier. The monetary policy multiplier shows the effects of changes in real money supply on the equilibrium level of income, keeping the fiscal policy unchanged. When there is an increase in the real money supply, the income will rise by the amount of monetary policy multiplier. The higher the multiplier, more will be the expansionary or contractionary effect of a money supply changes. Delta Y0 upon delta M upon P is equal to gamma B upon H, where gamma is equal to H alpha G upon H plus K B alpha G. B is equal to interest rate sensitivity of investment. H is equal to interest rate sensitivity of demand for money. K is equal to income sensitivity of demand for money. The value of monetary policy multiplier is in turn determined by gamma, B and H. The monetary policy will be more effective when we have large values of B and alpha G. Also, as gamma is equal to H alpha G upon H plus K B alpha G, smaller h and k will lead to higher increase or decrease in income level. Next, we have slope of IS curve. Another important factor on which the effectiveness of a monetary policy in the ISLM model depends is the slope of IS curve. A steep IS implies that investment is not very sensitive to the changes in interest rate. So, a larger increase in interest rate is required in order to raise the aggregate spending and income in the economy. Thus, steeper the IS curve, less expansionary the monetary policy will be. It can be verified from given figure. As IS curve is steeper, aggregate spending is less sensitive to changes in interest rate, and income rises by a small amount in response to a monetary expansion. Next is slope of LM curve. The slope of LM curve depends upon interest rate and income sensitivity of demand for real money balances. A steep LM curve implies that interest responsiveness of demand for money is lower while income sensitivity is higher. In such a case, monetary policy is quite effective in influencing output. On the other hand, a flatter LM curve corresponds to high interest rate sensitivity to demand for money and causes lesser increase in income and output. Next is lending behavior of banks. For monetary policy to be effective, an important factor is the lending behavior of banks. When interest rates drop as a result of monetary expansion, this encourages investment spending by the firms in the economy because of lower cost of investment. For financing investment expenditures, firms approach banks. But it may be possible that banks may not be willing to lend due to prevalent pessimism in the market. If the banks will not lend, this will eliminate an important link in a monetary transmission mechanism. Thereby, it will significantly affect the investments and will not lead to the rise in output. That is the reason why sometimes monetary expansion has only limited impact on the economy. Next is development of money markets. The most important factor on which the effectiveness of monetary policy depends is the extent to which the financial markets are developed in the economy. This is an important precondition for the monetary policy initiated through the open market purchase and sale of bonds to successfully affect the aggregate demand. Next is the prevalence of informal credit sector. Given the large share of informal financial sector, the success of RBI's monetary policy in influencing the output through interest rate channel seems bleak. So, there exist a number of factors such as the degree of monetization of the economy, the extent to which households borrow from the formal financial system, which affect the monetary authority's ability to influence demand conditions through its policy instruments. Next is the fiscal policy stance. The effectiveness of monetary expansion relies on the fiscal policy stance taken by the government at the same time in the economy. Sometimes government finances its spending, that is deficits, through borrowing from central bank, which in turn print new currency to finance government deficits. This is called as monetizing deficits. This leads to only inflation in the economy with no positive effect on output and demand. Apart from previous, there are many factors like how fast lending rates change in response to policy rates, the state of development of financial markets, the available monetary policy instruments, the fiscal stance, and the degree of openness on which the success of each channel depends. Now, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. First, as the LM curve deals with the money market, it is used as a monetary policy tool. Second, the monetary transmission mechanism is the process by which changes in monetary policy affect the aggregate demand and income level. Third, There are various channels like interest rate channel, credit channel, balance sheet channel, bank lending channel, exchange rate channel, through which the monetary policy influences the real variables. Fourth, each of the channel of monetary transmission has a different lag structure in influencing the aggregate demand. Fifth, the effectiveness of monetary policy depends upon slope of LM curve, slope of the IS curve, monetary policy multiplier, bank lending behavior, state of development of financial markets, fiscal policy stance, etc.